I never imagined that a few cords of firewood would destroy my peaceful suburban life and lead me down a path of revenge that would reshape an entire neighborhood. But here I am, sitting in my lawyer's office watching the final paperwork go through that would make everything official. My name is Brian Lancaster, and I moved to Riverside Meadows in Portland, Oregon 3 years ago. It seemed like the perfect place to settle down after my divorce. The development was new. The houses were beautiful craftsman-style homes with actual character, and the neighborhood backed up against Forest Park. I'm a software engineer who works remotely, so the quiet cul-de-sac lifestyle appealed to me. Plus, I had this romantic notion about having a wood-burning fireplace and spending winter evenings with a good book and crackling fire. The first winter went smoothly. I bought firewood from a local supplier, stacked it neatly against the side of my house under the eave to keep it dry, and enjoyed countless cozy nights. The stack was maybe 4 feet high, 8 feet long, covered with a tarp when rain got heavy. Nothing excessive, nothing unsightly. My neighbors Ron and Patricia even complimented how I'd arranged it, said it gave the place a rustic charm. Then, Susan Whitmore took over as HOA president. Susan was everything you'd expect from the stereotype. Mid-40s, blonde highlights that screamed expensive salon, drove a white Lexus SUV, and had that particular smile that never reached her eyes. She'd lived in Riverside Meadows since the first phase of construction completed, and apparently considered herself the guardian of property values. Within 2 weeks of her election to the board, I received my first notice. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October. Official HOA letterhead, my address printed formally, the whole 9 yards. I remember standing at my mailbox, flipping through the usual junk mail and bills, then stopping cold when I saw it. Dear Mr. Lancaster, it has come to the attention of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association that you are in violation of Covenant Section 12, subsection 4, regarding outdoor storage of materials. Your firewood stack constitutes an unsightly storage issue that detracts from neighborhood aesthetics. You have 30 days to remove this violation or face fines of $100 per day. Sincerely, Susan Whitmore, HOA President. I read it 3 times, convinced I'd misunderstood something. Firewood. I'd seen firewood at other houses in the neighborhood. The Johnsons 2 streets over had a massive pile. Greg down the block kept his stacked in his driveway half the winter. That evening, I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants. I'd skimmed them when I bought the house, like everyone does, noting the usual stuff about fence heights and paint colors. Section 12 covered outdoor storage, but it was vague. No boats, RVs, or commercial vehicles in driveways. No storage sheds without approval. No excessive accumulation of materials that create visual blight. Visual blight. Those were the magic weasel words that could mean anything. I decided to handle it reasonably. The next day, I called the HOA management office and asked to speak with Susan. The receptionist said she'd pass along my message. 3 days went by with no response. I called again. This time I got voicemail. I left a polite message explaining I'd like to discuss the notice, that I felt my firewood stack was modest and well-maintained, and could we find a compromise. 2 more days passed. Then I received a second letter. This one informed me that my 30-day window was now 22 days, and that failure to communicate willingness to comply demonstrates contempt for community standards. That phrase, contempt for community standards, made my blood pressure spike. I'd been trying to communicate. She was ignoring me. I drafted a formal letter, kept it professional but firm. I pointed out that other homes had firewood, that my stack was neat and necessary for my fireplace, and that the covenant language was ambiguous enough that reasonable people could disagree. I requested a hearing before the board to discuss the matter. I sent it certified mail. The return receipt came back signed. Then nothing. The 30-day deadline approached. I called repeatedly. Finally, the day before the deadline, Susan called me back. "Mr. Lancaster, your firewood is a violation. The board has made its decision. If you don't remove it by tomorrow, fines will begin accruing. I suggest you comply." Her voice was clipped, dismissive. "Other houses have firewood," I said, trying to keep calm. "Why am I being singled out? Those matters are being addressed separately. Your violation is what we're discussing now. I've requested a hearing. The covenants guarantee homeowners the right to appeal decisions. The board will schedule a hearing at its convenience. That doesn't stop the fine process. That's not how it works. You can't fine me while an appeal is pending. Mr. Lancaster, I've been doing this for years. I know the rules. Remove your firewood or pay the fines. Your choice." She hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, absolutely stunned. I'd lived here 3 years without a single problem. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn maintained, even volunteered for the neighborhood cleanup day last spring. And now this. The next morning, I woke up planning to move the firewood. Pride isn't worth $100 a day, but when I went outside with my coffee, I noticed something. The Johnsons' massive firewood pile was still there. So was Greg's. I drove around the neighborhood. At least 6 other houses had visible firewood storage, some way bigger than mine. I took photographs, all of them. Dated, time-stamped, the works. That afternoon, the first fine notice arrived. $100 for day 1 of non-compliance. It included a new threat. If violations continued past 60 days, the HOA could place a lien on my property. I'm a logical person. I solve problems for a living. This was clearly personal, though I couldn't fathom why. I'd maybe exchanged a dozen words with Susan Whitmore total, all pleasantries. But something about me or my property had triggered her crusade. I paid a lawyer $300 for an hour of consultation. He reviewed everything and frowned. "Oregon HOA law is tricky," he said. His name was David Chen, came recommended from a coworker. "They have broad authority to enforce covenants, but they have to do it consistently. If they're selectively enforcing this rule against you while ignoring identical violations by others, that's a problem. However, fighting it will cost you thousands in legal fees, and there's no guarantee you'll win. Often the better solution is just compliance or negotiation." I tried to negotiate. "She won't even talk to me." "Then comply. Move the firewood to your garage or somewhere not visible from the street." "My garage is full. I use it as a workshop, and why should I? Why do I have to append my life because this woman decided to target me?" David shrugged sympathetically. "Sometimes battles aren't worth fighting, even when you're right." I left his office frustrated but saw his point. That weekend, I started researching alternatives. Maybe I could build a firewood storage box that qualified as a structure instead of storage. Maybe I could plant some shrubs to screen it from view, but the fines kept coming. Day 2, $100. Day 3, $100. I submitted another formal request for a hearing. No response. I sent a detailed letter pointing out the other firewood violations with my photographic evidence. No response. Day 10 arrived. $1,000 in fines. I called my HOA dues payment history. In 3 years, I'd paid just over $4,000 total. Now they wanted a quarter of that because of firewood. I attended the next monthly board meeting. These were supposedly open to all homeowners. The meeting was held at a community center the HOA rented. a bland conference room with folding tables arranged in a U-shape. Susan sat at the center with 4 other board members: Tim, Maria, Jeff, and Donna. About 8 other homeowners were scattered in chairs along the walls. When the meeting opened for homeowner comments, I stood up. "I'm Brian Lancaster, 847 Maple Ridge Court. I've been fined over $1,000 for storing firewood, yet I have documented proof that at least 6 other homes have identical or larger firewood storage. I've requested a hearing multiple times. I'm requesting again, formally, in front of this board and these witnesses. I want my case heard fairly." Susan didn't even look up from her notes. "Your hearing is scheduled for next month's meeting, Mr. Lancaster. We have other business to attend to tonight." "Next month? The fines are accruing daily. That's another $2,000 minimum. You could simply comply with the violation notice. Why am I being singled out when others aren't?" Now she looked at me, that cold smile appearing. "We address violations as they come to our attention. Your property was reported by a concerned neighbor. If you have evidence of other violations, you're welcome to submit formal complaints and we'll investigate those properties in due course." I did submit evidence 2 weeks ago, with photographs. "We'll review it accordingly." It was a brick wall. I sat down, shaking with anger. The rest of the meeting droned on about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance. Not a single other board member spoke up to defend me or question Susan's handling of my situation. After the meeting, I tried to approach her. She gathered her things quickly and walked out without making eye contact. Tim, one of the other board members, stopped me in the parking lot. "Look, man, I get it," he said quietly. "Susan can be difficult, but she's got 3 of the 5 votes on that board locked down. Maria and Jeff do whatever she says. Donna and I disagree with a lot of what she does, but we're outvoted constantly. So what do I do? Honestly, the board elections are in 6 months. Vote her out. Until then, you're kind of stuck. 6 months. At $100 per day, that would be over $18,000 in fines. Completely absurd." I went home and did something I should have done earlier. I really read the covenants, every single word, and I found something interesting. The document was 15 years old, established when the development first broke ground. It laid out all the usual restrictions, but it also included termination clauses. Specifically, the covenants could be terminated if 75% of property owners voted to dissolve the HOA, or if the property was sold to a single entity who then chose not to re-establish the restrictions on subsequent sales. That second option caught my attention. If someone bought up the whole development, they could essentially wipe the HOA out of existence. It was a wild thought, probably irrelevant, but I filed it away. The hearing finally happened 5 weeks after my first violation notice. By then, I owed $3,500 in fines. The hearing was a joke. Susan presented the violation notice. I presented my evidence of selective enforcement. She claimed those other properties would be addressed in due time. The board voted 3-2 to uphold the fines. I left that meeting knowing I had to make a choice. Pay the fines and move the firewood, surrender completely, or escalate. Here's what pushed me over the edge into escalation. 2 days after that hearing, I drove past the Johnsons' house. Their firewood was still there, exactly as it had been. I knocked on their door. "Mrs. Johnson answered, a friendly woman in her 60s. "Hi, I'm Brian from over on Maple Ridge. Quick question, has the HOA said anything to you about your firewood pile?" She looked confused. "Our firewood? No, why would they? Just curious." "Thanks." I checked the other houses. Nobody else had received violations, just me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Susan's dismissive attitude, the rigged hearing, the complete lack of fairness. And I thought about that termination clause. On a whim, I started researching. Riverside Meadows had 112 homes. It was built in 3 phases over 5 years, completed about 14 years ago. Most of the original owners still lived here, though some homes had turned over. Property values were good, around $500,000 average. That meant the whole development was worth roughly $56 million. An impossible sum for any individual buyer, but for a developer, maybe not impossible. Portland was growing. Development pressure was constant. And Riverside Meadows sat on prime land, relatively close to downtown, backing against Forest Park. I spent the next week learning about real estate development in Portland. I made a list of major developers who'd done projects in the area. Then I did something crazy. I called them. Most ignored me. I was just some random homeowner with a weird pitch, but I kept trying, refining my approach. Instead of leading with the HOA drama, I focused on the opportunity. Premium land, established neighborhood, potential for redevelopment into higher density housing. A company called Cascade Urban Developments agreed to a meeting. Their office was downtown, modern and sleek. I met with a development manager named Patricia who listened to my pitch with raised eyebrows. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You want us to buy your entire neighborhood so you can get revenge on your HOA, not just revenge. This is a legitimate opportunity. Riverside Meadows is single-family homes on large lots. Portland's upzoning everywhere. You could tear down and build townhomes, condos, mixed-use developments. The location is incredible. It would cost us $50+ million to acquire. That's a massive project, I know. But I'm not asking you to commit today. I'm asking you to evaluate it, and I'm offering to help. I'll talk to my neighbors, gauge interest in selling, provide insider information about the property conditions and the neighborhood dynamics." Patricia leaned back. "Why would your neighbors sell? It's a nice area. Some might not, but some will. People are always looking to cash out, especially if you offer above market value. Plus, the HOA is a nightmare. I'm probably not the only one tired of their garbage." She didn't commit, but agreed to run it up her chain. I left that meeting energized for the first time in weeks. Meanwhile, the fines continued. I stopped paying them, which was risky. The HOA sent increasingly threatening letters. Susan left me a voicemail saying the board was considering pursuing legal action to place a lien on my property. I called David Chen again. "They can do that," he confirmed. "If the fines are legitimate under the covenants and you're not paying, they have the right to lien your property. It could complicate things if you try to sell or refinance." "What if I countersue for selective enforcement?" "You could. Discovery might force them to explain why they targeted you. But like I said before, it's expensive and uncertain." I thanked him and hung up. The legal route was a dead end. My only real play was the development option, and that was a long shot at best. 2 weeks later, Patricia called me back. "My boss wants to meet you. Are you free Thursday afternoon?" Thursday, I met with Richard Moss, senior vice president at Cascade. He was maybe 55, sharp suit, gray hair, the kind of guy who radiated competence and authority. "Patricia says you want to hand us your neighborhood," he opened with, amused. "I want to propose a mutually beneficial business opportunity that happens to solve a personal problem," I corrected. He laughed. "Fair enough. Look, I'll be straight with you. We've been looking at Riverside Meadows for about a year. The land is fantastic. We ran some preliminary numbers on a rezone and redevelopment. The returns could be substantial. The problem is acquisition. Buying out 100+ homeowners is a logistical nightmare. People get emotional about their homes. It turns into a circus. What if I could help organize it?" Make introductions, address concerns, smooth the process. Why would you do that? What's in it for you besides screwing your HOA? I'd prepared for this question. I want above market value for my house. 20% premium. And I wanted in writing that if you succeed in buying the development, you'll terminate the HOA covenants and not re-establish them when you resell the new units. Richard studied me. You really hate this HOA. With a passion. 20% is steep. I'm bringing you the deal. I'm doing the groundwork. And frankly, if you're redeveloping the whole neighborhood, you'll make tens of millions in profit. My premium is a drop in the bucket. He considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, here's what I can do. We'll pay you 15% above market as a finder's fee, structured as part of your home sale. You help us acquire at least 60% of the properties. If we hit that threshold and move forward with the project, we'll terminate the HOA as requested. Deal. 15% was still good. I stuck out my hand. Deal. We shook on it and Richard had his lawyer draft a formal agreement. I signed it that afternoon. Now came the hard part. I had to convince my neighbors to sell. I started with the people I knew best. Ron and Patricia next door were retired, had occasionally mentioned wanting to move closer to their daughter in Seattle. I invited them over for coffee and laid out the situation. A developer wants to buy the neighborhood. Ron looked stunned. They're interested, yes. They'd offer above market value. I don't know exactly how much, but probably fair. The thing is, they need enough people to commit to make the project viable. What would they do with it? Patricia asked. Redevelop. Probably tear down the houses and build something denser. Townhomes, condos, maybe mixed use. They exchanged a look. We like it here, Ron said slowly. I get it. I did too before the HOA nonsense. I'm not pushing you. I just wanted to give you a heads up that this might be happening. If you ever were thinking of selling, this could be a good opportunity. They promised to think about it. Over the next month, I had similar conversations with a dozen neighbors. Some were immediately hostile to the idea. The Hendersons told me to never speak to them again. Others were intrigued. Greg, the guy down the block with Firewood, was getting divorced and actually thanked me for the tip. The breakthrough came when I approached the Kowalskis on Birch Lane. They were younger, maybe mid-30s, with 2 small kids. We'd chatted at neighborhood barbecues a few times. God, yes, Tom Kowalski said immediately. We've been trying to figure out how to get out of here. The HOA is insane. Last month they fined us because our garbage can was visible from the street an hour past pickup time. An hour. I had to leave for work and forgot to bring it in right away. $50 fine. His wife Michelle nodded emphatically. And they rejected our request to add a back deck. Twice. The first time because the stain color wasn't on their approved list. The second time because the design wasn't in keeping with neighborhood character, whatever that means. If you could sell above market value and escape, you'd be interested, I asked. Absolutely, Tom said. They became my allies. Tom worked in marketing and had a knack for persuasion. Together, we identified other households likely to be fed up with the HOA and approached them strategically. The fines against me, meanwhile, had climbed past $7,000. Susan sent a certified letter informing me the board had voted to authorize legal action. A lien would be filed within 30 days unless I paid in full. I ignored it. At this point, I was all in on the development plan. Cascade began the formal process. Richard's team sent out letters to every homeowner in Riverside Meadows expressing interest in purchasing properties. The offers were generous, about 10% above recent comparable sales. Some people immediately said yes. Others wanted to negotiate. A few told Cascade to pound sand. The neighborhood erupted in gossip. Suddenly, everyone was talking about the potential sale. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Susan stood at the front of a packed room, nearly 50 homeowners in attendance. Her face was red, her voice tight. "This development company is trying to destroy our community," she declared. "They want to bulldoze our homes and cram cheap apartments in here. They're manipulating people with money. We need to stand together and refuse to sell." Someone in the back shouted, "What if we want to sell?" "It's our property. You'd be betraying your neighbors," Susan shot back. "This neighborhood is special. We've built something here. Values, standards, community." I raised my hand. "Susan, can I ask a question?" She glared at me. "Mr. Lancaster, if the HOA is so great, why are you trying to force people to stay? Maybe people want to leave because of how the HOA operates. Maybe if you treated homeowners fairly instead of like subjects, there wouldn't be a mass exodus." The room got very quiet. Susan's jaw clenched. "Your personal vendetta is transparent, Mr. Lancaster. You're orchestrating this entire scheme because you're bitter about legitimate fines for legitimate violations." "Legitimate? You fine me for firewood while ignoring identical violations at other homes. That's not legitimate, that's targeted harassment. That's absurd. Then explain why the Johnsons still have their firewood pile, why Greg still has his, why I'm the only one who got fined." She sputtered, looking for words. Tim, the board member who'd been sympathetic before, spoke up. "Susan, he's got a point. We should have addressed all the firewood violations consistently. That was my position during the vote." "We addressed the violation that was reported," Susan insisted. "If Mr. Lancaster wants to waste this board's time playing gotcha with photos of his neighbors, that reflects on his character, not ours." The meeting devolved into arguments. About half the room seemed sympathetic to Susan's position that selling out would ruin the neighborhood. The other half was angry about the HOA and intrigued by the financial opportunity. It was deeply divided over the following weeks. Cascade made steady progress. They secured commitments from 30 homes, then 40, then 50. Richard kept me updated. The magic number was 63, 56% of the 112 homes, which would give them enough control to move forward. Susan fought back hard. She organized a Save Riverside Meadows committee. They put up signs, sent letters, held meetings. She argued that property values would tank if the development went through, that the character of the area would be destroyed, that everyone would regret selling. Some people listened, but others had already made up their minds. The Kowalskis closed their sale. So did Greg. Ron and Patricia eventually decided they were ready to move to Seattle after all, and signed a contract. The turning point came when someone on Susan's committee dug into the HOA finances and discovered that Susan had been paying herself a management fee of $500 per month for the past 2 years, something never approved by a homeowner vote or disclosed in the annual budgets. Tim and Donna, the dissenting board members, called for an emergency audit. When the full financial records came out, it got worse. Susan had also been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses, dinners, shopping, even a weekend trip to wine country. Probably $15,000 total in questionable charges. The scandal broke open at another emergency meeting. Homeowners were furious. Even people who'd opposed the development were now disgusted with Susan. Someone threatened to call the police. Susan claimed everything was legitimate compensation for her time, and that the expenses were all HOA related, but nobody believed her. The board voted to remove her as president immediately. Donna took over as interim president. The board also voted to suspend all pending fine collections pending a full review of enforcement practices. That meant my $7,000+ in fines were on hold. More importantly, it meant the HOA's credibility was shattered. Cascade's acquisition accelerated. People who'd been on the fence, who'd trusted Susan's arguments about community and values, now saw the HOA leadership as corrupt. If this was the community Susan had built, they wanted out. 60 homes. 62. Then 65. Richard called me with the news that they'd crossed the threshold and were moving forward with the project. "We'll close on the committed properties over the next 90 days, he explained. Then we'll begin the planning and zoning process for redevelopment. That'll take probably a year with the city. During that time, we'll continue trying to acquire the remaining homes as people are willing to sell, but we have enough to proceed." "And the HOA covenant termination?" I asked. "That happens as soon as we own 56% and file the paperwork. It's automatic under the covenant's own terms. Once we're the majority property owner, we can vote to dissolve the HOA. Any homes we don't own will no longer be subject to the covenants. They'll just be regular properties." Music to my ears. The next few months were a whirlwind. I closed on my house sale in August, pocketing a hefty check that included the 15% premium. The amount was enough to buy a nicer place outright in a neighborhood with no HOA. I found a beautiful bungalow in the Selwood district, older home, tons of character, and critically, no restrictive covenants. I watched from a distance as Cascade finalized more purchases. By October, they owned 71 homes. They formally voted as majority owner to terminate the Riverside Meadows HOA and filed dissolution paperwork with the county. Susan tried to fight it legally, filing some kind of injunction claiming the termination wasn't valid. Her lawyer argued the covenant's language was ambiguous, but it wasn't. David Chen had confirmed the clause was clear and enforceable. The judge dismissed Susan's case within a week. The HOA ceased to exist in November, about 8 months after this whole saga started. But the story doesn't quite end there. Remember those financial improprieties. Several homeowners, led by Tom Kowalski, filed a formal complaint with the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit. The detective assigned to the case reviewed the HOA records and interviewed board members. In January, Susan was charged with theft and embezzlement. The amounts weren't huge in the grand scheme of things, maybe $20,000 total, but it was enough for criminal charges. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to theft in the 3rd degree, a misdemeanor, paid restitution to the former HOA members, and received 2 years of probation plus 100 hours of community service. I didn't attend her court hearing. By that point, I'd moved on emotionally. My new house was everything I'd wanted. I had a beautiful fireplace, and I stacked firewood on my back patio without a care in the world. No HOA, no restrictions, no Susan Whitmore. The former Riverside Meadows neighborhood was a construction zone now. Cascade moved fast once they had the properties cleared. They'd rezoned the land for medium-density residential and were building a mix of townhomes and small condo buildings. The new development would have about 300 units total, nearly triple the original density. Each unit would be individually owned, no HOA or master association, just normal property ownership. Richard invited me to a topping-out ceremony in June when they finished the framing on the first building. I drove out there, parked on what used to be Maple Ridge Court, and walked around. My old house was gone, just a memory. In its place was the skeleton of a 3-story townhome building. "Hell of a thing," Richard said, joining me. "A year ago, this was a quiet suburban neighborhood. You really turned it all upside down over Firewood." "It wasn't about the firewood," I said. "It was about being treated fairly, about not letting petty tyrants abuse their power. Still, most people would have just moved the firewood." Maybe. But then Susan would have moved on to the next person, the next violation, the next power trip. At least this way she can't hurt anyone else. We watched the construction crews work for a while. The noise of nail guns and saws filled the air. It was strange seeing the land transformed so completely, but also satisfying. This was a new beginning for the property, free of the covenants and restrictions that had caused so much conflict. I ran into a few of my former neighbors over the next year. The Kowalskis bought a house in Beaverton with their sale proceeds and loved it. Greg's divorce finalized, and he moved to Bend to start fresh. Ron and Patricia sent me a Christmas card from Seattle, thanking me again for the opportunity to be closer to their grandkids. Not everyone was happy with how things turned out. The people who'd refused to sell and stayed in their homes had to deal with living adjacent to a major construction site for 2 years. Property values for those remaining houses were uncertain. Some probably increased due to the area's development and improved walkability. Others might have decreased due to the higher density and traffic. That wasn't my problem, frankly. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. The legal aftermath for Susan dragged on for a while. Some of the homeowners considered a civil lawsuit to recover damages beyond just the stolen money, arguing her mismanagement had caused property value losses and unnecessary legal fees. I don't think anything came of it. By that point, Susan had declared bankruptcy, so there wasn't much to recover anyway. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to Sacramento to live with family. Part of me felt bad for how completely her life had fallen apart. The criminal record, the bankruptcy, the public humiliation. But then, I remembered her smug smile during that board meeting, her refusal to even discuss my situation reasonably, her willingness to abuse her position to harass someone over nothing. Actions have consequences. She'd built her world on a foundation of petty power and control, and when it collapsed, she had nothing left to stand on. As for me, life improved dramatically. Without the constant stress of HOA battles and accumulating fines, I was happier and more productive. Work went well. I got a promotion. I started dating someone I met at a coffee shop. A woman named Nicole who laughed when I told her the Firewood story and said she'd never live somewhere with an HOA either. We spent that first winter in my new house going through cords of firewood, the stack proudly visible from the street. No tarp, no worries. Every time I carried in logs for the fireplace, I felt a little surge of satisfaction. I also got more involved in local politics, specifically around housing policy and HOA regulations. My experience had opened my eyes to how much power these organizations wield and how little oversight they face. I testified before the Portland City Council about strengthening protections for homeowners, requiring more transparency in HOA operations, and making selective enforcement easier to challenge. Some of my suggestions were incorporated into a new city ordinance regulating HOAs within Portland limits. It wasn't a huge change, but it was something. Maybe it would help the next person facing what I'd faced. The final chapter of this saga happened about 2 years after everything started. I got a letter from a law firm representing several former Riverside Meadows homeowners. They were pursuing a class action lawsuit against the old HOA board for breach of fiduciary duty and mismanagement. They wanted to know if I'd join as a plaintiff. I considered it, but ultimately declined. The lawsuit seemed likely to drag on for years with uncertain outcomes. Susan had no money. The other board members had been largely ignorant of her misconduct. I'd already gotten my revenge and moved on. Adding more legal drama to my life held no appeal. Instead, I sent the lawyers my documentation of the selective enforcement and wished them luck. If they wanted to fight that battle, more power to them. I was done. These days, I occasionally drive past what used to be Riverside Meadows. The construction is complete now. The new development is called Parkview Terraces, a collection of modern townhomes and condos with clean lines and lots of windows. They sold out quickly, popular with young professionals and small families who wanted to be close to Forest Park and downtown. There's no gate, no sign listing community rules, no HOA office. Just regular streets with regular houses and people living their lives without someone hovering over them with a rule book and fine notices. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted. If maybe I should have just moved the firewood, paid the fines, taken the path of least resistance. Life would certainly have been simpler. But then I think about Susan's face during that board meeting. Her absolute certainty that she had the right to control how I used my property. Her contempt for even listening to my perspective. I think about the financial misconduct we uncovered. The other homeowners she would have kept tormenting if nothing had changed. And I think about the termination clause in those covenants, the legal option that existed for situations exactly like this, where an HOA had become more harmful than helpful. I didn't overreact. I reacted proportionally to someone who declared war over firewood and wouldn't accept peace. I used the tools available within the system she claimed to represent. If the system allowed for terminating the covenant through majority property transfer, then that was a legitimate solution. The whole experience taught me important lessons about standing up to bullies, even institutional ones. About doing your homework and finding creative solutions. About the danger of giving small-minded people unchecked authority. It also taught me that homeownership shouldn't come with a side of dictatorship. The American dream is supposed to be about freedom and independence, not about busybodies measuring your grass height and fining you for having the wrong mailbox color. Nicole and I got engaged last fall. We're planning a small wedding here at the house, ceremony in the backyard with the fireplace visible through the windows. I'm going to make a joke in my vows about finding someone who shares my anti-HOA values. She'll laugh. Our friends will laugh. And we'll build our life together in a home that's truly ours, not subject to the whims of a board or the tyranny of covenants. The firewood stack on my patio is bigger now. I upgraded to a nicer wood storage rack, got it from a craftsman who builds them custom. It holds about 6 cords, enough for the whole winter with plenty to spare. It's beautiful, honestly, the split wood arranged in neat rows, the rack's design complementing the house's architecture. Sometimes neighbors walking by compliment it. One guy stopped last week and asked where I got the rack because he wanted one for his place. We chatted for a while about wood-burning fireplaces versus gas inserts, the best places to source firewood, whether oak or maple burns better. It was a normal, pleasant conversation between neighbors. No undertones of violation notices or community standards. Just 2 people talking about a shared interest. That's what neighborhood life should be. Last month, I got an email from Patricia at Cascade Urban Developments. They're starting another project in Tigard, a similar situation with an older HOA community on prime development land. She wanted to know if I had any interest in consulting, using my experience to help smooth the acquisition process. I politely declined. Once was enough. I'd accomplished what I needed to accomplish. Time to let someone else fight those battles. But I did give her one piece of advice. Find the person being screwed over most egregiously by the HOA. That person will be motivated. That person will help you understand the neighborhood dynamics and identify other homeowners who might be ready to move on. That person is your way in. She thanked me and said they'd keep that in mind. I haven't heard anything about Susan in over a year now. I assume she's rebuilding her life somewhere, hopefully learning from her mistakes. Maybe she's even become a better person. Or maybe she's just found new people to control and torment. I honestly don't care anymore. My life is good. The house is wonderful. My career is thriving. Nicole makes me happier than I've been in years. We're talking about starting a family soon, maybe adopting a dog first to practice responsibility. And every single night during winter, I light a fire in the fireplace with wood from my massive, visible, completely legal and unrestricted firewood stack. I watch the flames dance and feel the warmth spreading through the room. Sometimes I think about that first violation notice, the moment this all started, and I smile. Because I won. Not just against Susan or the HOA, but against the principle they represented. The idea that someone else gets to dictate how you live on your own property, that rules matter more than reason, that power excuses abuse. I won by refusing to accept their reality and creating a new one instead. The house is quiet tonight, except for the crackling fire. Nicole is reading on the couch, feet tucked under her, completely content. I'm sitting in my favorite chair with a glass of bourbon, thinking about writing down this whole story, maybe turning it into something people could learn from. Outside, my firewood stack sits proudly under the porch light, a monument to the principle that your home should be your castle, not your prison. And that's exactly how this story ends. With warmth, peace, freedom, and enough firewood to last the winter.